Hi, everybody. It's Ryan from Pi Records, and I'm here with Adrian from Broadway Twisters. How are you, Adrian?
I'm fabulous. How are you?
Very good. Um,
Well, that's good.
thank you for accommodating our schedule. Um, I know you're over there near London, and so the time difference is quite a few hours. But I want to get right into the band and how you started, and tell me a little bit about your music.
The band started quite a long time ago, actually. We started about 8 years ago, kind of by accident. It was started by me and a guy, a double bass player called Bill Mann. And yeah, we just sort of did covers and stuff, just like everybody else. And we've been through like a series of drummers. So we've never really had a permanent drummer. But we just finally got round to. It's been way overdue. We finally got round to doing our album like last year, or putting it out last year. It came out in September. But it's been a bit of a sort of a long time coming, really. We recorded the first session for it about quite early on, really, about sort of like sort of 6 or 7 years ago.
Wow.
But we never got round to exactly. But we never really got round to finishing it until like the last year or so. We had 4 songs sitting in the can. We released them back in the day, like like an EP, a download only EP.
Yeah.
And then we finally got round to recording the rest of the album in like a couple of weekends. So really, the whole album was recorded in 3 weekends, but 8 years apart. So that's just the way it kind of worked out, really.
So for our
band,
oh, go ahead.
It's rockabilly in essence, but we're trying to do something else. I mean, we're sort of quite heavily influenced by sort of like get 60s garage punk and that kind of stuff, and punk generally. So yeah, we're just trying to do something a little bit different from
before the interview. You mentioned something about Little Richard and how he's an inspiration to you.
Yeah, well, he's an inspiration. I should imagine he's an inspiration to everybody, really, whether people realise it or not. I mean, he's so much part of the general fabric of popular culture that even if you don't know who he is, or if you don't like him, you'd have experienced him in some way somewhere down the line without realising it. But he's certainly an influence on us. Like I really wanted the whole album that kind of sounded like Little Richard's voice. Like I sort of mentioned before, it's there's no sound, there's no echo or delay or anything on Little Richard's voice. They recorded it really dry, but because it was so unique anyway, and I think they pushed the mics a little bit, I kind of wanted the entire album to sort of sound a bit like I don't know, have the same sort of tempestuousness as Little Richard's voice, the sound of it,
Yeah. There seems, yeah, I see him. I see you're a vinyl lover as well.
It's the only way to fly. Yeah, it's the only way to listen to music, really. I mean, I've got a lot of CDs, but they're for the car, at home.
Yeah.
Vinyl.
In the States, they don't even have CD players in the cars anymore.
They don't have CD players. Oh, really? What is it? All downloads and stuff?
Well, it's like a Bluetooth you can listen to in the car.
Right. Oh,
like
really?
You can listen to your phone in the car.
Yeah, we're still living in the 90s here a bit. I've definitely still got my CD player in the car. That's most of where I get to listen to, most of the music, really.
Yeah,
chance I get, I've got 2 kids here that go running around crazy, so
yeah,
it's hard to listen to anything.
I commute to work about an hour and a half every day, so I'm constantly listening to music on the road.
Yeah.
And I have like 2 boxes full of CDs I can't listen to in my car anymore.
Why not?
But I listen to them at home when I work at home and do the music thing.
Right. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about the sound of your music. I know you said it was punk in general influenced, but tell me a little bit about the instruments you use, the gear, and how do you get that gritty sound?
Well, like I say, we kind of overdrive a lot of the microphones and stuff, but we use. I've got a couple of Gretches. We use various things in the studio. Really, I've got a couple of Strats as well. You know, most of it all goes through a hot rod, a Fender hot rod amp. But obviously, very often in the studio, you kind of experimenting and stuff, and somebody might leave a pedal lying around or something from a session before and say, oh, what does this do? And they'll stick it on, and you never know what you're going to get. You know what I mean? I mean, for me, a successful recording session is one where you come out the other end of it with something you never knew you were going to go in with. You know, obviously you go in prepared, you know what to do, you know what you're going to, what your starting point is. But by the time you've sort of been in there all day and you've sort of, you know, experimented and played with a few things, I like it when you come out and you think, I've no idea we were going to come up with that, you know.
Yeah.
So it depends really, but like I say, it's all. I mean, rockabilly in essence is, you know, country music turned up to 11, and it's all about the energy of it, really, as much as the sound. I guess the sound ends up sounding a bit raucous purely because of the way we play it as opposed to the equipment we use. You know.
Yeah.
That's my excuse. And sticking to it.
So, what do you think drew you to rockabilly music? I know you love Little Richard, but why specifically did you settle on that genre? And what is it about rockabilly that you love so much?
Well, it's the honesty and the directness of it, really. I guess the thing that kind of got me interested in rockabilly, I mean, we grew up, you know, my mum and dad were always big Elvis fans, so we knew about all that stuff anyway. You know, we knew who Elvis was, obviously. But I remember my mum got the Sun collection. Now, I don't know if you know, there's a newspaper over here called The Sun, and she used to buy the newspaper, and I thought it was free with I thought the album was free with the newspaper. You know, when people think, yeah, you get free CDs with magazines and that. And it said the Sun collection, and it didn't have any liner notes on the back, so it didn't explain it was a record label. So I thought she got it through with the newspaper, loved it, and it sounded totally different from all the other stuff I've heard of Elvis do. You know, and it's basically a 19-year-old Elvis with a two-piece band, and that directness and that straightforwardness. You know, it was like, whoa, you know, I'd never heard anything like that before, and it was. I mean, really, it's just that's all it was, with a lot of, you know, slapback echo on it. And the other thing that happened around the same time was punk came out. You know, punk happened. Now, I like punk. I love punk. I came to appreciate it a lot later on. But at the time, I didn't really know much about the music or where it was coming from. All I knew was what I read in the papers with kids putting, you know, safety pins in their noses and all that. And I just thought, this is idiotic. So obviously, as kids, you know, the gang that I kind of hung with were kind of looking for, you know, it was trendy. It was like the trendy thing now is to be into punk. So we were like, we hated anything trendy. We hated anything modern. So it's like, well, what's the opposite of punk? And it was like rockabilly. And it became a kind of, that's why, you know, the neo-rockabilly movement in the late 70s and early 80s, it came out of that, really. It was, in a way, it was an embrace of punk. At the same time, it was a rejection. You know what I mean? And so that's what that kind of got me turned on rockabilly music. And obviously that leads to all these other guys and all these other, you know, like really obscure artists that never had a hit back in the 50s, but all of a sudden they were like brand new. It was like brand new music because it was being listened to for the first time in 20 years, you know, and probably more, you know, with more attention to who these people were. Sleepy the Beef, nobody knew who Sleepy the Beef was, you know, and people like Glenn and all these were forgotten masters, really, that was suddenly, you know, we rolled away the stone and the resurrection happened. That was us, and that's what got, you know, that's what I loved about it, was that it was obscure and it was old, but it was absolutely completely unheard of and brand new. It was like, you know, discovering an Egyptian tomb, you know, 3,000 years later, and it was like, whoa, check this, you know.
Yeah, and there's a huge rockabilly scene in England, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I mean, it's never really gone away. You know, you always had the Teddy Boy. You know, when the Teds happened in the 50s, my dad was an original Ted from like the 50, the 50s when he was 16 years old. In fact, this is him on the cover of the album.
Oh, I love that album cover.
Yeah, it was from the picture was taken in 1957. He was 16 years old when that picture was took. So it was original 50, it was an original 50s picture. And so when the Teds came out, a few years later you had the Mods, and later on obviously punks in the 70s. But it never really went away. It was always a law unto itself, and it's always been there. And then what happened in the late 70s is when the rockabilly thing started happening, kids like us couldn't afford drape coats. We couldn't afford, that kind of super sharp look that the Teds had. So we kind of was looking around for the next best thing, and that's when we started kind of getting into Americana and going to secondhand shops and finding peg trousers and box jackets and Hawaiian shirts, because this stuff was dirt cheap. And that's kind of what rockabilly, the British version of rockabilly is. That's where it kind of came from. We couldn't afford to be Teds, so we had to come up with something else, and that's where the rockabilly sort of scene came from. But it's like I say, and that's never gone away, and it's as big now, if not bigger, than it sort of ever was. Really, it's always been there. It's just the media will come and go and sort of be aware of it for like a couple of years and then forget about it, but it's still there. Those clubs are still going, that music is still being played, and there's always good rockabilly bands around if you want to, if you just look for them.
It's one thing that was interesting that you pointed out is that in the 70s there was a lot of turbulence in music, meaning punk was against disco was against rock. The answer, like you said, to punk was rockabilly. What was that like to be in such a tumultuous time?
It was a bit strange, because if you think of the late 70s and early 80s, that was probably the last time all these subcultures existed at the same time. I mean, now it's, if you go to rockabilly clubs, it's not really about the fighting anymore, the tribes. You kind of had to pick a tribe, really, in order to stay safe. It's like if you're in jail, you have to be a white supremacist or a Nation of Islam or something. In order to, you have to pick something to survive. It was a bit like that. In America, I think gang culture was more about territory, and in it was about music. If you were into punk, it was your duty to beat up a Ted. Do you know what I mean? And if you was a skinhead, it was your absolute, it was your mission to slap a smoothie or whatever. There's all these tribes, so you kind of had to choose one. But that's the way it was then. But the weird thing about it was, like I say, at the end of the 70s, you also had like a mod revival, and then Two Tone came a little bit later on the back of that. Then you had the New Romantics in the early 80s, and the Peacock Punks and the Blitz Kids. And you still had your Teds, you still had your rockabillys, you still had your skinheads, which is a thing that started in the late 60s. And they all existed at the same time. And that was probably the last time that kind of really happened, the first and last time that really happened, because when you got into the 80s, all of a sudden it became kind of like sportswear culture and trainers and hoodies and hip hop culture, and it kind of killed it. All of a sudden, corporate sportswear was where the kids were kind of going. And, these sort of roots, these ground roots subcultures were kind of wiped away, they kind of wiped out, really. And it was a bit like when you had like skinheads and Teds and punks and mods and rockers and, all at the same time, it was a bit like those old, Raquel Welch movies, 1 million years BC.
Yeah.
When the dinosaurs existed at the same time as the cavemen. But it was kind of like that. All of a sudden, all these different cultures, all these different eras all seem to kind of exist at the same time. So it's a bit strange.
It must have been exciting, though.
Yeah, it was certainly. Well, as a kid, you don't know any different, really. The thing that was interesting about it for me, especially when you look around the world now, it was pretty much, as far as I know, drugs free and guns free. You never had any of that. It was like, if you had a fight, it was a punch up. Nowadays everyone's stabbing each other. I mean, there was something, so there was that in its favour, really. But it was exciting because there was some fantastic music. Like I say, there was all that music that was being that was happening at the time. You had the Clash and Elvis Costello and the Jam and Blondie and all that, the Ramones, the New York punk scene and all that stuff that was happening. And that was all brand new, and that was really exciting. Then you had all the stuff that was being discovered that you never even knew about, that was just sort of coming up, and then when you just listen to sort of people like, the Ramones or whatever, they'd be talking about the Velvet Underground or the Doors or whatever, and it was like, wow, that's the great thing about it. All these nothing, as Chuck Berry said, there is nothing new under the sun. Everything comes from somewhere.
Yeah.
And you get, by listening to a brand new band, you got exposed to stuff that was old anyway.
Yeah.
It was exciting. It was a great time for a very creative time for music, and it's stuff that I still listen to this day.
What I love and would like to have more on in the show is a little bit more about the suede head, skinhead, and two-tone
Right.
genres of or subcultures. Can you specifically talk to those?
Talk to those.
I mean, just talk about them.
Well, my first experience of skinheads as a kid, I mean, like I say, they really kind of, I was made aware of skinheads really by my uncles. I had two uncles, John and Tony, and they were fascinated by skinheads. This was during a period of like glam rock, really. They weren't skinheads themselves, but I became aware of skinhead. Skinheads during that period because they were really into ska, and they used to play all the all the Trojan stuff and everything. And they lived in Kensal Rise, which is a part of London which was famous for like the race riots in '58. There was a lot of funny enough, that was obviously it was '58, and so a lot of Teds in those days, Teddy boys, were quite racist, you know what I mean? And so the race riots happened in '58. And this is where my mum's side of the family come from. They lived in that part of London. And by the time I was kind of like any kind of age, they loved it. They loved ska music, loved ska and reggae. So I heard a lot of it then. And I grew up in Brixton. My earliest childhood memories were in Beechdale Road in Brixton. Again, it's like a massive sort of multicultural community and has been for years. And so some of my early childhood memories are hearing ska coming out of the neighbours' houses and stuff. So I kind of grew up with that stuff anyway. And then going to school in the '70s, that was when the rockers era reggae that sort of came about then. So it was always around me all the time anyway. But because of that, it was always skinheads. I mean, I remember the original skinheads, which was like sort of 68, 69. And you had kind of weird offshots as well, like suede heads. You had Orange Boys, which were kind of influenced by Clockwork Orange. So they wore the big boots and the white stay press, but they'd wear Crombies and they'd carry canes around and wear the bowler hats. So you had that kind of offshot as well. There's always these different. I mean, you've got three major primary movements. You've got the Teddy Boy, the Mod, and the Punks. But of those three movements, you got all these weird sort of like, you got your goths and the greasers and, like I say, suede heads, Orange Boys that come off the skinhead thing. And skinhead kind of came out of mod, really, I think, in a way. I mean, there's probably people out there that would dispute that, and fair enough. I think that kind of come off the back of mod because they were all wearing, Fred Perry, polo shirts, and they wore a lot of the stay press tonic suits. That's something the mods would wear, and then the suede heads and skinheads would wear that stuff later on as well. So that was really kind of spin off from mod, I think, the whole skinhead scene. But again, great music. And then, like I say, in the late '70s when Two Tone came out, it brought all up again because it was weird because it was almost exactly the same what happened in the sort of around 60, 65, 66 into 68. You had the mod thing, and all of a sudden, straight on the back of it, you had the skinhead and suede head scene. And that's kind of what happened around '78 when Quadrophenia came out. I think that made people get kind of very interested in what mods again. And then like a year later, boom, you know, Two Tone was like the biggest thing that hit England, you know, since punk. So yeah, that's my experience of it. You know what I mean? I was never a skinhead or a punk myself, because obviously a skinhead or a you know, sort of Two Tone follower myself. But I do have a lot of those records. I love that old ska stuff anyway. I always have done, you know. So
Yeah,
that's my experience of the whole skinhead scene. I managed to avoid them for the most part.
that's probably a good idea.
Yeah, some of them, yeah.
And in the United States in the late 80s, there was more of a skinheads were around, but there was also an offshoot, the Nazi skinheads that were causing a lot of trouble.
Yeah. I mean, that's my impression of American sort of skinheads. It seemed to be that they say, yeah. I guess it's like here. There was probably a lot of people, you know, American skinheads that were into the music and the look, but over here, our impression of it in America seemed to be it was adopted straight away by a sort of, you know, the Aryan supremacists and all the rest of it, you know.
Yeah.
There's which is massively unfortunate. I don't really know much about the skinhead music scene though. I mean, what was that like? I mean, just you and you now. I mean, what did they have much of a scene music?
I don't. I think, well, all the shows I went to like the thrash shows, the punk rock shows, they came to us. Like I've never been to like a skinhead show. Because every time they would show up, they'd cause trouble. And there'd always be fights. So when I grew up, I started meeting the traditional skinheads, and they were totally different. That was a different animal. And I was weary at first. But I found them to be much more kind.
Yeah, well, they were more about the music and the look, you know. I mean,
Yeah.
there was a lot of black, you know. It was a great sound. And of course, you know, I'm surprised it wasn't more black skinheads, purely from the basis that the music they were into was pretty much 100% black. I can't think of any white ska bands around at that time. You know, in the late 60s and early 70s, it was absolutely, as far as I'm aware, it was exclusively, the music was exclusively black. You know, and the people who were listening to it almost exclusively white. But you know, there was a lot of rude boys were black. There was a lot of black rude boys. That was their thing as well. You know, so. I don't know, but yeah, over here it was definitely more about the look and the sound, you know.
Yeah.
But in all those factions, you've always got your idiots anyway. You've always got like racist factions anyway.
Yeah.
It was, you know, like a heavy, like I think in the sort of early 80s, up to the early 80s, you had bands like Screwdriver and that. Now I might be wrong, but I think they were quite heavily into the whole, you know, sort of Nazi sort of associations. I might be wrong. But yeah, so there's always been that faction, though. You know what I mean? Yeah, wherever you go, you're always going to find those sort of people.
I don't know. I don't know much about Screwdriver, but I heard they didn't start off as a white supremacist band. I heard that political stuff came later on.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that much about them. My experience with them was I had a girlfriend whose brother was heavily into all that, and he used to go to them. So that's kind of how I knew who they were and what they were about. You know what I mean? So that was always a bit iffy, but yeah, that's show business.
Yeah, I guess part of it is the shock factor.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of them, you got to remember, you know, a lot of them are young kids and they don't know what they're into yet anyway. And it's like, that's a scene, it's something they're into. They got an older brother that's into it, all their friends are into it. You know, they don't, I guess you just, you know, we all do stupid things when we're young, I guess. You know what I mean? That's what being young's all about. Luckily for most of us, it doesn't involve getting hitched to sort of questionable, you know, sort of political movements. But, you know, like I say, it's, I would imagine most of those people grew out of it. You know, it's called growing up, and a lot of, you know, maybe a few of them don't. You know, they get stuck in it and go and sort of live the rest of their lives like that. But what are you gonna do?
Yeah. I want to get back more into rockabilly and ask you about two musicians in particular. in the early 90s, we had this Chris Isaac was a huge deal, and even Morrissey went into a rockabilly phase, which I really enjoyed. Do you think that had something to do with the 90s rockabilly resurgence?
I wasn't really aware of a 90s rockabilly resurgence. Like I say, it never really went away. I know who he is, and I quite like a lot of his stuff. I was listening to his album the other day. He went into Sun Records and recorded a load of stuff, didn't he?
Yeah.
That was pretty good. I liked it. But in the 90s, I guess, when did that record come out? Was it 92?
Yeah, I think so.
Like that?
Yeah.
I would imagine, because I wasn't really sort of involved in to be honest, since the late 70s, I haven't really been involved in any rockabilly scenes as such. You know what I mean? I've kind of done rockabilly myself, and I've been interested in myself, but I haven't really kind of aligned myself to any scenes. So I don't really, like I say, we're a law unto ourselves. We don't really know what else is going on. We're just kind of quite blinkered, really. So I would imagine that he was liked by whatever the state the rockabilly scene was in the early 90s. I would imagine a lot of them liked him, and he kind of and adopted him as such. But I wasn't kind of part of it. I don't really know where the clubs were at that point. I was a bit out of it, I think.
Cool. Well, that's I only caught the fringes of it because I was about to go to college at that time, and punk rock in Nirvana was starting to get really big. So I had a whole other genre that I was just digesting at the time.
You can only absorb so much at once.
Yeah. One of the cool things about talking to you today is that you were there, and it's and I wanted to talk to you about your band, but the thing that makes these conversations so interesting is the story of the people's lives behind the music.
Right. Okay.
So I really appreciate you telling us all that, because it's very enlightening and very enjoyable to hear you tell the history of where you come from in the music world.
Thank you. Yeah, well, we've all got our memories and stuff, and there's always something going on. So, yeah, I mean, don't get me started. You know what I mean? I could be all night nattering away about something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, music's always inspired me anyway. I mean, music's always been central to who I am. And if you're interested in it, obviously you immerse yourself in it completely for the most part. And I've always done something musically. I've always been involved in some kind of musical escapade or another. I've played with all types of different sort of music. Really, I like to keep an open mind. That's one of the things that kind of annoyed me a little bit about rockabilly, or any movements really. When I first got into it, straight away it was like, you can't have anything in your record collection that was after 1960. You know what I mean? It was like, right, you can't have it. And I was like, we were all like that then. It was really stringent, and it was like nothing should, deviate away from the party line, from the accepted narrative. Now, I mean, I listen to all kinds of stuff, you know what I mean? But, like I say, rockabilly was the first music I really kind of got excited about and made me want to be in a band. And in a lot of ways, I've kind of come a full circle, and this is where I'm back to now, because I want that honesty and that straightforwardness, and I find it in that kind of music, really. So, but yeah, I mean, I've been involved in all kinds of stuff.
What were some of your early bands like?
Well, okay. Like I say, the first sort of band I had was at school, and that was a rockabilly band, obviously. And then I kind of moved away from London, and that's when I started kind of being a bit more open-minded about what I was listening to. And I kind of secretly liked, like I said before, the Jam, Elvis Costello. Those bands were kind of coming up at the time, and I kind of liked them, but you couldn't really admit it. It was like coming out. It was like, it was like admitting your homosexuality or something. You know what I mean? Declaring your homosexuality. in that scene, the rockabilly scene, there's no way you were going to say that. There's no way you're going to admit that in public. But when I moved away from London, I was away from that crowd. I kind of got open-minded. I mean, I still always listen to, old rock roll records and stuff like that. But then I kind of got excited by, the new wave thing that was happening at the time. So the bands I was in at that time were kind of influenced by new wave. I mean, we had we were in one band, and I was Joe Strummer because I had the Telecaster, and the other guy in the band was Paul Weller because he had the Rickenbacker, which I bought off him.
You bought off of him?
Huh?
You bought off of Paul Weller?
No. This is I bought off the guy who thought he was Paul Weller. But he was a guy I was in the band with, so we were doing Clash and Jam numbers and stuff. So that was one of my earliest bands. And then later on, I kind of I was in a band. My first proper band really was a band called Milk Plus. Again, it was a three-piece, but it was kind of quite sort of garage punk with sort of psychedelic tinges. So we used to play in Paris a lot. A lot. We went every year in the late 80s. Then in the early 90s, I was kind of listening to a lot of the acid house stuff and kind of underground dance scene, and that was kind of interesting. And we did I started a band called Jonathan E. We released a few singles, 12-inch singles and stuff. I kind of got involved in that. And then a little bit later on in the 90s, I was in a band called Environmental Science, who did, again, they were on Skint record label with people like Fatboy Slim and Nick General and those bands. Yeah, so I was kind of involved in that. I took a back seat a little bit. I was writing songs for them and playing guitar, but they weren't really my bands. I was just kind of involved in them. So I've done a lot of that stuff, and then in the early 2000s, I was trying to make a movie, actually. I was trying to get a movie done, so I didn't do too much music then. And then I started a band called the Silver Brazilians, which was kind of like a garage punk influenced band, but that did quite well. Little Stephen from Bruce Springsteen's band, he played us on his radio show, and it did quite well. It did really well. Yeah, it was. We had a song that he put on there that they did. Every week, every week or every month. Coolest song in the world. So we got coolest song in the world on Little Stephen's radio show. So that went quite well. And then it was only when that band fell apart. It's only when that band fell apart. We started the Broadway Twisters. So like I say, I've come like a full circle, really. I've been involved in all kinds of stuff, and now I'm back to my roots. Yeah.
That Stevie Van Sant that show was really big here.
Yeah, we gathered that. I hadn't really heard of it, in fact, I don't even know how that came about. I think I sent an EP. We did an EP, and there was a song on it called "You're Dirty, I Love You," and they emailed me and said, "Oh, we really like your song. You're Dirty, I Love You. We're thinking of putting it on the show." But then I think then we had a second EP out with a song on it called Kate Winslet, about Kate Winslet, which is really. Yeah, I know, it's stupid. It was kind of a rip-off. It was Dizzy Miss Lizzie with the words changed. But, so it took longer to sing it than it took to write it. But then I think she was up for the Oscars for The Reader, and they heard about it, and they were doing an Oscars edition. And they dropped You're Dirty, I Love You, which I think is probably, it's a better song. And they went with Kate Winslet instead, and they played that, and it was on heavy rotation. And even now, we're still sort of selling downloads and stuff off the back of it. And that was like 10 years ago, you know what I mean?
Wow.
So, it did pretty good, actually. Yeah, so it was that band's big hit single, really, Kate Winslet. But it was a great show. What's it doing now? I mean, is it still? It still goes, I guess.
I'm sure he is. I haven't been. I think he's on Sirius, but I don't follow Sirius XM. But there's a lot of videos of his stuff on YouTube. So I think if you wanted to find it, you could see his show on YouTube.
Yeah. Yeah, it was. I'll have to get back into it again. I'm going to send them. I'll probably send them a Broadway Twisters CD. I don't know if it's their scene, but hey, you never know.
Yeah.
We did quite well with that other one, so maybe we can do it again. But yeah, so that's it. Yeah, so basically, the Broadway Twisters is the thing I'm doing now, but I'm starting to do a lot of solo stuff as well. I really want to do. I've been listening to a lot of kind of Americana artists like Gillian Welsh. I mean, I should imagine you've heard of her and Dave Rawlins. But there's Brennan Lee and Noel McKay, Billy Strings. There's a lot of that sort of stuff I've been listening to. I really want to do something like that, next. But we'll see. I've got to get a band. I've got to get the right kind of band together. I mean, it'll probably be Broadway Twisters, but with a lot of different artists of that type maybe brought in to sort of guest and stuff to get that kind of sound. But that's where my head's at the moment. I've been writing a lot of kind of, I don't know, I've been listening to George Jones and people like that,
Yeah. Before we go, before we sign off, I want to ask you about your CD that's coming out, your new album, and tell me a little bit about who you're working with and where people are going to be able to find that.
Well, like I say, the album on vinyl, limited edition, 180 gram red vinyl, folks, came out in September, and you can get that on Tengu Crew, Big Cartel, Tengu Crew. You can find it on there's a link on our Broadway Twisters page. So it was just going to be vinyl only. It's got a download card with it, so people, if they want to burn it onto a CD and stuff. So that's all we were going to do, really. And then we got approached by Del Littlejohn from Always a Hit Records, and they're up in Scotland. I think they might be in Glasgow or something. And they sort of come out of the blue, really, and they said, "Oh, we'd like, do you want to do a CD edition of it?" And we've had this before because somebody wanted to do a Silver Brazilians compilation album on cassette. So we sort of said, yeah. I think they were based in Canada. And it was great, but they brought it out. But it was amateur night. You know what I mean? It was just like a photocopied cassette.
Yeah,
and we could have done it ourselves, really. So I was a bit skeptical, and I said, well, okay, well, if we can keep the artwork of the album, the cover, similar to what we've got on the record, then okay, fine. But they did it, and they did an absolutely fantastic job. It was like, whoa, I just sort of thought, it'd be some kind of like burn off. They'd done it on their laptops or whatever. When it turned up, it was great. They did like a limited edition of it. They kept half of them to sell, and it's right. They gave the other half to us to do with what we will. And it was like really impressed. Yeah, fantastic. So if Always a Hit Records comes calling, I'd listen if I were you, because I think they're going to do really well. They've certainly done well by us anyway. So yeah, they've done a great job on that. So it wasn't even going to be a CD, but it certainly is now. Yeah, fantastic.
That's excellent. And Del is quite an artist as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've listened to some of his stuff online. I need to listen to more of it, actually. I get so inundated with his stuff, but that's a great band, great album they've got out. Yeah, so yeah, I mean, who knows? Maybe we'll do something together at some point. Gigs or something. I don't know. When the plague ends, maybe we'll end up in Scotland, or they can come down here.
Yeah,
try to figure out.
Awesome.
But yeah.
Is there before we sign off, is there anything you'd like to talk about that I haven't mentioned?
Yeah, how do you like my wig?
That's not a wig. That's a pompadour.
Yeah, I really wanted to talk about my hair, but you just wouldn't. You just didn't bring the subject up, man. You know what I mean? But no, I don't know. I think I've probably covered the whole history of popular culture within this last sort of half hour, ever long it's been. So I don't know what else I can tell you.
Well, it was excellent hearing you talk about all the subcultures, rockabilly, and your music. I really had fun talking to you, and I appreciate your time.
Total pleasure. Anytime.
Awesome. You have a great afternoon.
And you, mate. Thanks for having me. Good luck with it, and I'll see you soon. Love to Philly.
Thank you.